Welcome to the Connected Enterprise Podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host, and my guest today is Brian Saemann of GoBeyond SEO. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Carl. Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, before we get started, tell us a little bit about your personal journey and about GoBeyond SEO.
Yeah, absolutely. GoBeyond SEO is a company that I started actually with my wife back in 2010. Back then, SEO, I wouldn't call it in its infancy at that point, but it was probably a toddler. SEO was still a pretty new discipline. I had been building some websites, getting them ranked. We had a couple of eCommerce websites, a couple of different informational websites, and really just kind of self-taught myself SEO. So we ended up, my wife was in advertising sales at the time for radio stations. And more and more businesses started to ask about being able to, get ranked in Google. So we started to offer that service, not just doing it for ourselves at that point, but offering it out to other folks, particularly after, the 08, 09 bubble burst. Lots of people went into business for themselves, wanted to get, ranked in Google. So that we just realized that there was a real need for the service. So we expanded out, created our own agency, and really just have been doing it ever since. Certainly expanded out. We're not just SEO now. We were just SEO when we started, but trends you see in SEO is that the more and more time goes on, it just gets bigger and bigger. It gets broader and broader. It used to be a real technical niche specialty. And really at this point, if you're doing your SEO right, you better be thinking about marketing strategy. You better be thinking about content. You better be thinking about optimization and conversions. So it just, it gets bigger and bigger. So our services got bigger and bigger. And I would say now we really focus on lead generation primarily. There's a lot of agencies out there that might focus on web design or on branding, things like that. We've really found our success in the lead generation space. So we do a lot of SEO and advertising for our clients and help them get leads. Makes
sense. So you guys have been in business since 2008. So 15 years or so, right?
Yeah. I would say in 08, we were really more doing it for ourselves, building websites for ourselves. We had, some e-commerce things going on, stuff like that. It was really 2010 was when we first started to do it for other folks, for clients. So been doing SEO really since 07, doing it for other folks since 2010.
So you guys have this, kind of up and coming business that's been growing and expanding out, doing new things. How did you guys weather the pandemic over the last couple of years?
Well, just like everybody else, I'm sure it was interesting times for everyone. So yeah, the pandemic was interesting, especially because April of 2020 actually ended up being probably the worst month we've ever had in the history of the company. Uncertainty is not good. So, when business owners are uncertain of what's going to happen, they tend to, pull back on what they're doing, kind of get into that protective fetal position a little bit, which I think we all felt like we were in back in April of 2020. So April of 2020 was not great, but very quickly businesses realized, well, okay, we're not going back to the real world anytime soon. I need to be digital. I need to have a presence online. So a lot of clients who have been like, hey, I just need to pause for a little while, came back by May and said, you know what, I actually need to accelerate. I need to get going faster. So for us, the pandemic actually ended up being kind of an impetus for even more business. Businesses that weren't doing anything online realized that they needed to start doing things online. And the businesses who were really wanted to do more. So it was an interesting time for sure.
How did it kind of impact you guys just from a working staff, everybody remote, those sorts of things? Did you make changes or have to make changes?
Well, I tell you, it's interesting. We didn't. So we are a remote company now. We have had office space in the past, but before the pandemic hit, we had decided to go remote. So we'd already been remote for probably about 2 years. So we were ready to go. So really what it did was it just made our business model more acceptable. I think it just more, people, they used to want to meet in person, things like that. And now everybody just wants to do a Zoom call. I found it interesting, even clients who I've been having phone calls with for 3 years, right? We have monthly phone call, weekly phone call, whatever it is. all of a sudden we're like, hey, let's do it on Zoom. And, because people were just getting into that, and, everybody got into Zoom. It's interesting. There's a bit of Zoom fatigue now, I would say. And those have gone back to phone calls in a lot of spots. But so as far as what we needed to do as a company to adjust, we had already done. We kind of had that resiliency built in because we were already remote. So, it was hard on some folks, kids were home from school, things like that. So we had to do a little bit of flexibility as far as, some people were like, hey, I've got my kid during the day, I'm going to do more work at night, things like that. So we were able to maintain that agility and flexibility and really make it work for us. And I would say, for the most part, it didn't really affect us too much.
Yeah.
As far as how we operate.
I think it's, you're the uncommon business that was kind of set up to do it, from day one. So you didn't have to scramble.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure you saw a lot of your clients kind of scrambling in the early days.
No doubt. And we're lucky that our business really is digital. So we're able to do that, right? I mean, some of our retail clients, I mean, they're brick and mortar stores. They had a tough time adjusting. I mean, the ones who already had at least some e-commerce set up, like we worked with a chain of jewelry stores, they already had some e-commerce on their website. They didn't do a tremendous amount, but it was there if people wanted to shop that way. And, we just totally pivoted and started to push the online experience more. I think they did. I mean, it was a big number, 10 or 15 times more revenue online in 2020 than they did in 2019.
Wow. Do you think, has this changed, kind of your perspective on, the future of work and then in general or in specific to your company even?
Oh, I think so for sure. Absolutely. I think that this was a trend that was happening, right? Like we're not the only business that had gone remote before the pandemic. It was slowly starting to happen. And I think that the pandemic just completely accelerated that trend. So, I mean, you see a lot of companies now that if they are back in the office, they're hybrid. So it's, maybe you're in the office for 2 days a week. I think a lot of companies are going to stay with that model now. A lot of companies are just still fully remote, and maybe they just have some, all team meetings once or twice a month. So yeah, I think it's changed work as we know it for sure.
Yeah, I think there's still reluctant folks out there. I saw that Elon Musk today basically said to his employees, come back to work or we're just going to consider you as not working for us anymore. So
no kidding.
Yeah,
oh, wow. That's an interesting take. I guess we'll see how that plays out.
I think his belief is that he's got a bunch of folks working for him that aren't working.
Right. And there are some bosses like that, right? They need to see it. They need to see the people in there doing their thing. But I think a lot of folks who may have felt that way in 2019, a lot of bosses, owners have really realized, you know what, remote can work. And honestly, in some businesses, and I'm not saying it is for every, I think remote can be way more efficient, just way more efficient.
For some, I would agree. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I may miss the water cooler, but I probably spent too much time at it. Right.
Right. Exactly.
It's sort of the context of that for sure.
Take out water cooler time, commute time, things like that. It can be much more efficient
and add quite a few hours to your personal life in a day. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, it sounds like Elon Musk's employees included, really don't want to go back. They're like, no, I've got this worked out pretty good here.
Yeah, exactly. There may be other places they can go. So, you guys, do SEO for people. And I'm curious, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, how important, that SEO became during the pandemic for businesses that before maybe they were doing a little bit, but they weren't doing what they are now. Did you see kind of a surge, and is that sustained? Yeah.
We did. So it was interesting. You just had to get exposure online, right? So a lot of our clients are professional service firms, and a lot of professional service firms will do their lead generation through networking, right? And they'll go to networking events. Maybe they do some speaking gigs. And honestly, we do a lot of that for our business too. But when the pandemic hit, that just completely shut down. So they had to find new ways of getting in front of their potential customers. And SEO and really a lot of Google ads as well. The benefit of SEO is that if you put the effort in, you put the time in, you can get to the top of the search results and you have some traction. You can stay there. But it does take some time. It's not going to be an immediate impact. So a lot of folks who really were like, hey, I wasn't expecting this, I need to have an immediate impact. we got them really into more Google ads. And that is something you can build relatively quickly, build yourself a digital funnel and start moving some traffic into it pretty fast. Right. Advertising, you hit go on the campaign and it shows up on Google really a couple of minutes later. So you start getting people there. And, there are different pros and cons to both SEO and Google ads. I really think that they serve each other very well, that if you're doing both of them, they inform each other better, really well. You can see what's happening on the Google ad side and find new keywords to go after. And it's just kind of the sum is greater than the two parts.
Yeah, exactly. The thing I wonder about SEO, somebody gets into it, but, and says, I want to increase, our exposure out there. But if you don't have any real content, it's like you've got nothing to work with, right? So
100%. Yep.
So you're not, you're not just saying, oh, we got to do SEO. I mean, there's so much more behind that's got to be there for it to carry forward any value, right?
I could not agree more. Yeah. I mean, maybe when we first started back in those 2010 days, you wouldn't have to create new content in order to rank for terms. You might have been able to just really optimize your site and get the right things in the right places and get some links and see some traction. That is definitely no longer the case. You do have to create content, and you got to create good content. It's not easy anymore. Blogging is, it's an absurd number of websites that are WordPress based, and WordPress started as a blogging platform. I can't remember the percentage exactly, but I want to say like 60% of the websites online are WordPress websites. Wow. So those businesses all have access to a blog. They can all put content out, really with just the click of a few buttons. And, it's gotten to a point where if you're not doing that on a consistent basis, Google's just not going to reward you, right? It's very easy for them to see how often and really how well you're producing content. And they're going to reward the businesses that do.
Yeah, it's one of my key roles in my company, of course, is podcasts, web chats, whatever else they ask me to do.
New kinds of content, yeah.
And they turn it into all kinds of stuff, right? And if I write a book, they start talking about the book, and it's just I don't think people understand the investment you have to make in content in order to really have SEO working for you, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of executives if they're a smaller company. They got to be that guy, right?
Yep.
Because you have to have something of value also, right? It can't just be stuff. It's
yeah, and it's interesting because so many businesses just kind of want to talk in that kind of typical corporate speak, kind of neutral language, very scared to offend anybody. and you just have to take on some personality, right? Like people aren't necessarily they're not gonna give you their attention, right? I mean, let's face it, the entire world right now is essentially a battle for our attention, right? Social media is battling for our attention, television, internet, like everything's just a battle for our attention. And if you want to get someone's attention, you got to put a little bit of personality into it.
Yeah, you talked about it, like when you first started out doing it, it probably wasn't very competitive, right?
Exactly.
And if you were doing it, you were the exception, and you were exceptional.
Yep.
People were finding you, with no competition. Now,
yep,
everybody's screaming the same thing all the time.
Right.
So
yep,
it seems like it just continues to be harder and harder to rise to the top of the stack. Do you find that about the future of SEO? Do you see it changing in ways?
Yeah, SEO is definitely changing. And I agree with you that it much more effort is required now in order to get to the top. But I don't, it's not impossible. I don't want to put the idea out there that it just can't be done anymore, because it certainly can. It's just you do have to put that effort in. I do see SEO changing. One of the broad things, and we've touched on this a little bit, but really since the beginning until now, SEO has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, right? It really used to be a very specialized skill that only a few people knew. All those people were self-taught because you couldn't learn it anywhere. So it was just done through a bunch of, trial and error, and there was a pretty tight-knit community around it. Whereas now, there are courses you can take and things like that. So you get able to get to that baseline a lot faster now. But you do have to start to include other things outside of SEO, like content, like actually starting with a strategy. 10 years ago, I can't tell you how many folks would come to us and say, hey, I want to rank for XYZ keyword term. And I would do the research, and I'm like, there's literally no searches around this keyword term. Like, why do you want to rank for it? That no one is typing it in.
Yeah.
But for some vanity reason, they just really wanted to rank for that keyword. And, it was an educational process to be like, hey, you really don't need to rank for that one. Let's concentrate on some other ones. And thankfully, I think that we're beyond that point, right? Businesses at this point, they know what SEO is, they know that it can benefit them. And now it really is an education around, like you were saying earlier, hey, I've got to get you to produce some content, and it's got to actually be some pretty good content. So it just has broadened the discipline a bit. And actually now we're seeing some tools that are really giving us the ability to broaden it even further. I mean, there's some AI tools out there now that will write content for you. It's not the best content, but it's only going to get better and better. So it at least helps you get started, right? The hardest thing in the world is staring at a blank white page. So it gives you something to get started, and you're able to use it from there. And there's all kinds of AI tools out there that will help you, find topics to write about, will write the topics for you. There's tools out there that will help you manage campaigns and optimize them. So it's definitely getting broader and broader.
That's something I wanted to ask you about. Is there technology that's changing kind of around SEO? You talked about it a little bit with AI. Are there other things, just in terms of tools and, stuff like that that are growing?
Yeah. I would say the biggest impact that was on SEO was probably the widespread use of easy content management systems, right? So you have, we mentioned WordPress earlier. It's just a content management system you're able to build your website with. There are other ones out there now. HubSpot's a great example where they make it real easy for you to create content and to optimize it for SEO. So before that, I mean, some of the I told you when I started in 07, 08, those websites, those were like HTML websites, right? So it was not easy to go in and adjust things like title tags or meta descriptions and the things that Google looks at in order to rank a website. Whereas now with these content management systems, it's so much easier to get into your website and make adjustments. You can be so much more agile, much more fluid situation, and it makes it so much easier to produce new content, right? Putting a new page on a website back then was really difficult. So that was probably the technology that had the biggest impact. And now I would say the AI space is where we're seeing the biggest impact happen now. There's just so many new tools coming out. Some are better than others, but they're going to be around to stay. I don't think that AI is going to take over, but I do think marketers who don't use AI are going to be behind the curve, right? So marketers who use AI might take over, but I'm not necessarily scared of AI taking over.
Yeah. I still think, it's really in early stages wherever it's being used. Mm-hmm. Some things are really phenomenal that it's doing. But I don't think we've had our best thoughts yet about how to deploy AI. So
totally agree. Sure. Yeah, it can be an interesting future, and we gotta pause for a minute, right? And just actually have conversations around how we should use this stuff.
Well, it's like you say, you've got to have a plan. I think that's
yep.
You don't just go get some of that there SEO, right? I mean,
right.
You have to be a little bit more thoughtful than that. What do you think? With all these new technologies and things around, all of this doing work on the web and, being in a virtual world that we're part of, what do you see as some of the big challenges for businesses that maybe they're not using it today? They know they need to. Mm-hmm. What are they challenged with as they're trying to get going?
Yeah, I think one of the real big challenges you touched on earlier, which is the need to produce this content, right? I mean, you're with your company to get more content produced. So you do a podcast, and then they're going to repurpose that into a blog post or, put out the transcript, or this video is probably going to go on to YouTube. So there's so many different places you need to be now that you really do have to have a plan on how to, because otherwise, like really every company has sort of become a publishing company, right? Or a media company. They have to be producing this content. It might have been they used to produce brochures, or they used to produce a white paper. Like now with it being digital, there's so much you need to produce, and the tools are such low barrier to entry tools now, like YouTube and podcasting, that they would be crazy to not figure out how to use them and use them well.
Yeah. And I think you're right. A lot of the smaller businesses that I know, their founders, their CEO, their president is really, completely removed from that, and but knows he needs to be involved.
Yeah,
and it's tough to, be
really
available,
tough
to have those conversations. Put the time aside, and what would you tell them? Because they don't have the time to kind of learn all this stuff themselves.
Yep.
But if they want to kind of be the voice for their company, what's a good way for them to start? What are the resources they need to have around them to make that happen?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's really two ways to go. One really excellent way of producing content is to really just listen to your customers. Like, what questions are they asking you? What problems are they running into? Because you can guarantee if one or two of them are asking that question or running into that problem, dozens of them are, and they're going to the internet to find the solution. So I would just catalog all the, have the sales team, the service team, just catalog all the questions that people are asking, and I would produce content around those questions. You're right. Some firms, the CEO is going to play a big part in the production of content. And especially like we were talking about earlier, if you're going to get some personality into the content, you're definitely going to want it to have the personality of the principal. So that is really just around, you just got to be disciplined about it. You got to be structured about it. You're right. They don't have the time. They're not going to sit down and write blog posts. And we like to get the principals out of the content production piece of things as much as we possibly can, because they tend to become a bottleneck just because they don't have the time for it. So what we'll do is we'll interview them, and we have a whole set of questions that we'll ask. A lot of it is based around the questions that their customers might ask, questions that we have about their business, and really just kind of get them to spill the beans a bit. And we can take that and we have it as audio, we have it as video, we have it as transcripts, and that just helps us really get the content production started. And I found that because they don't have time, a lot of folks may be reluctant to get started. But if we can get that interview done and we can start to show them like, hey, like this isn't just one piece of content, this is 6 pieces of content. And once the ball gets rolling, it rolls downhill pretty fast.
Yeah, if you had everybody collect those questions you're talking about, and you could get the CEO in a room for a day and ask, hey, what about this question? What about this? Hey, customer so-and-so asked this. What would you tell them, right?
Yep.
You could put a lot of stuff together in just one day, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe have a couple of those days a year, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Last topic for you is like a lot of companies, they don't really have I'll call them marketing poor. Not only do they not spend money on marketing, but they don't really have a marketing thoughtful person in their company.
Sure.
If they really kind of want to go down this path and be more thoughtful about all these things, what's the first step they need to take?
I really think the first step, if you're starting to consider like, hey, I really want to build out my digital presence, I really want to get found, I want to do some lead generation online, I want to start, getting my customers online. I really think the first step is to just do some keyword research or hire somebody to do some keyword research, because you really do have to see how much volume is there out there. Like, is it going to be worth it for me to produce this content? Or, how worth it is it going to be? Do I want to get super aggressive? Do I want to start small and build from there? And keyword research is really what's going to be the piece of information that's going to let you know, like, wow, this is an untapped resource that I really should be going after. Or, what, people don't really search for me too much online. It could be something that doesn't have, because not every business is a good fit, to be totally honest. And if they're not a good fit, why waste money trying to get people online? Like we were talking about, companies wanted to rank for a term that there was absolutely no search behind. Right. There's just no point to that. So keyword research is what's going to let you know, hey, I need to really concentrate on this or not.
That's a good suggestion for sure. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us today. It was great.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Good to talk to somebody who's got a unique perspective on things, and you do, and shared some good ideas. So we'll check back with you after another year or so and see what things are changing up.
All right. Sounds good. I appreciate it, Carl. Great conversation. And yeah, who knows, a year from now, that whole AI scene could be totally different. We might have something totally new to talk about.
And that's what I'm thinking. Well, thank you much. And thank you everyone who's listening in today. And we'll see you again on the next episode of Connected Enterprise Podcast. Until then, stay connected.